Well, we're back at some pictures of myself, but I really wanted to get away from this and bring you into the rest of the house. And especially I wanted to talk a little bit about the art that I have, because it's art that was made by people here in Sarasota, sometimes in Bradenton and sometimes down in Venice, but it's an example of the variety of art that's available here. This is by a young 17-year-old girl who had just come up to the Ringling School of Art from Puerto Rico. This is by a good friend, Nancy Matthews, who has these whimsical altars. And here's my garden. I think you can't live without a garden. I don't know any poet who doesn't love green things and to watch them grow. It's part of the artistic spirit, is that creativity, and there's nothing more creative than watching a garden grow and helping it. You know, art is all around us, and to give you a good example, the dad of a friend of mine, his name is John Benefido, is a dollhouse maker. He's retired, and I asked him one day if he'd make something for me, and he made me this Boca Grande lighthouse replica from little pieces of wood. It's all handmade, every single bit. It's unbelievable. This is a large, it's kind of interesting, abstract that was made for me. I don't have a lot of abstract work, but when it hits me, I do. And this is something that really looks well in the light, you know. It's a wire and wool construction that I keep kind of cased up to keep it clean, by Alice Sanders. I generally don't like abstract work. I shouldn't say I don't like it. It doesn't move me as much as the narrative work. I think that's its weakness. It only has an aesthetic quality to it, and it tends to be weak because of that, to my mind, because it's the narrative that makes things always interesting. You can see it in the work of any great artist. I think it's a modern thing. We see it in poetry and dance too. Somehow, if there's not a story that's emerging, at least the scaffolding of one. Like this double photograph of my son Justin in New York. He's knee-deep in the art scene, maybe shoulder deep, and in back of him is something happening that's very New York on that TV. I don't know if I can describe it here, but there's a story going on there of a young artist in New York, and I've added little things to his picture. I do that from time to time. I like to add things to art, little faces or whatever kind of strikes me. It's something that's living, so why not add to it, like this hat on the statue made by Suzanne Winters, one of my neighbors' sculpture of my head before I had a beard, and then some of the other masks we use in our performances. Art's all around you. It just makes your life richer, it seems to me. My parents were good parents. I would say they were, probably the best way to describe them is that they were dedicated. They worked very hard to make sure that we did well in the world. My dad worked at two jobs. He was in 2 military services, and he was in the Army Reserve. He was a colonel, so he could make some money by going to reserve meetings, and he was also a captain in the Federal Merchant Marine. So he was a busy man, but that money put the kids through schools, because all of the kids except for myself went to parochial schools, which cost money, and also through private colleges. My mother worked from the crack of dawn up, you know, and it just didn't stop. She just kept going. She had no help. She had the 7 kids, and she made sure they were fed, bathed, clothed, and every other thing that, in fact, a mother has to do. I think that they got that kind of dedication, which is staggering. I can look at it now from my own position as a parent, because their parents were also extremely dedicated, but in a very strange way. Both my mother and my father didn't have a father, or he was absent. My father's mother died shortly after childbirth, and his father died shortly after that of cancer. And luckily, in the meantime, he married a second woman who it took to raising my father after my father's father died of cancer. And she did a good job. She wanted him to be a priest. He didn't quite make it to that point because he met my mother. I don't think that was his calling anyway, but he went into the army, which was pretty close for a lot of reasons. It had that monastic quality to it, the army. But she was a hard driver, his mother, and she wanted him to do well, and there was nothing that she wouldn't do for him. My mother's mother was in the same vein, but she had a much harder job. She had to raise 7 children, with my mother being the oldest. 5 boys and another girl. Her father, my mom's father, very mysterious about why he disappeared, but he did. And there was something he did that was very bad. We don't know what it was. Sometimes he was just described as a heavy drinker and a carouser, but that was a kind of ordinary fare in that Irish immigrant neighborhood, you know. So I think it was something that was much worse than that. But from the time they were teens, he wasn't there, and my mother was the oldest teen, so she and her mother raised all the rest of the kids. They all went to private schools. My mother went to Teachers College at Columbia. All of her brothers and sisters got educated also in private schools, usually Holy Cross if they were boys. 2 became priests. So these were dedicated Irish mothers. And I think that both my mother and my father couldn't help but to pick that up. My father used to cover our books every year when we were in grade school, write our names on them and the grade and the title of the book, history or English, whatever it happens to be. He used to go in and see the principal, the guidance counselor, the head nun, whatever it was. He'd kind of come in his uniform. They loved that, the nuns, you know. He was like being visited by God. He would make sure everything was going to be okay, that we were paying attention in class, that we got A's, and we weren't kind of, you know, goofing off. He was very serious about it. He was a hard driver, but the result is that all of my brothers and sisters are high achievers, and they all responded to that very affectionate drive of my father and my mother for us to do well. I was one of those kids who really didn't like school. I did well in school. I got A's and everything like that, or B pluses, you know, but I never worked hard at school. It was easy to do. I was very bright, I think. I was probably a little bit too bright. I think today I would have been put ahead a couple of grades or something like that, or given some, you know, private study to do. But I just kind of drifted along. In those days, everybody was one big democracy, you know, the U.S. Everybody kind of was in the same class, and it didn't matter if you had a high IQ or a low IQ, you were in that class. I didn't like school. I didn't like going to school. My stomach was always nervous. It was a time where you had to do well. But even more than that, as I progressed up into high school and college, it was where you had to accept other people's opinions, and there were ways to do things and there were ways not to do things, you know. There's a let's say that as you get up in education, things become more, you're rigid. You have your playtime when you're in your 1st and 2nd and 3rd and 4th grade, but after a while, there's a curriculum that has to be taught, and a lot of it is implicit, you know. I didn't respond to that well. When I finally graduated from college, I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. No more school, just like I was going on vacation. Those years, from the age 6 to the age of 21, when I went through all that schooling, and even in some graduate courses, I just didn't like. I have a poet's independence. I didn't realize it at the time, but I just didn't like being told what to do and how to do it and how to learn it and what was important about other people. Yet at the same time, I was very respectful. I sat there. I was not a troublemaker, but I didn't like it.